Yeah, what I'm going to do is talk about demystifying retirement housing. Are there hidden costs and are they worth it? And how do you compare potential costs of retirement housing with the other options open to you, including remaining in your current home? And so I will look at the reasons people move in older age, possible moving options, and then I'll look in more detail than was possible last time at retirement housing costs and information sources. And we have plenty of time for questions at the end to pick up the issues that are concerning you. So this is information from the English Household Survey 2021-2022, which looked at older homeowners, by which it means anyone over 55. And it found that although older people move less than younger people, we still find that 7% of older homeowners have moved within the last 3 years, and a much higher percentage of older private renters have moved. And one could then speculate, although the evidence isn't there to support it, that 14% of older people will move within a 6-year period. And 44% of older homeowners are moving within 3 miles of their previous home, but quite a significant proportion, some 20%, are moving 50 miles or more. And one can speculate about the reasons why people move. Is it connected with retirement? Is it connected to be moving near family? We don't know. The data doesn't tell us. There is no relationship between that 21% movers and the following figures about the reasons why people move. But we do know that 30% of older movers are moving for family or personal reasons. 20% are moving to a smaller property and 20% are moving to a better neighbourhood or area. And again, you can't add these up neatly to make 70%. It's possible that I could move for all 3 of those reasons. But it seems pretty clear that quite a lot of us, as we get into our 50s, 60s and 70s, start thinking about, am I in the right place? Does this meet my current needs post stopping full-time work? And will it meet my needs as I age? And it's therefore important that we can make an informed decision about, are we going to stay put or are we going to move? So I'd like to start first by collecting a little bit of general information about you. And no way are we going to be able to look at this as an answer to any individual, but it would help to know how many people have moved in the past and how often you've moved, because the very tentative hypothesis that I'm floating, and Janet had doubts about this when I mooted it with her before the meeting, is that those of us who've moved a rather larger number of times may be more willing to move than someone who has been in their first adult home since they were 20 or 25. So yeah, could we have the first poll, please?
Can you see that, Kathleen?
I can. Can everybody else?
So there's 2 questions in this poll. So if you can't see the second one, just scroll down. And we'll just leave it open for a minute or so that people can...
Seems to have vanished off my screen.
I think this is the care poll, but it doesn't matter because we can take it anyway.
The poll has disappeared.
Yes, mine's disappeared as well.
I could only answer the first question and then it went.
Me too, yes. I could only answer the first.
Harriet, can we do something about that, or shall I just talk about the one I can see, which is the one about...
Do you want me to launch the other poll instead? Should we try that? Do you want the other one, Kathleen?
Yes, please. Let's try that one and see what happens. Otherwise, I can just report on the answers to both of them. It's fairly arbitrary, the order in which they come up.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, it's gone.
Let's
gone
again.
It's gone
again.
It keeps disappearing.
Apologies, that was me. I've just got rid of it, and now we're going to start again with the other one.
The one I can see now says, how many times have you moved house in your life? I'm hoping that's what other people can see.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And Harriet, will you tell us when it stopped? Do we just tell?
I will. Yeah, I can see the numbers going up on people that are participating, which is great. It's going up very quickly.
Okay. I mean, what this is starting to tell me is that most people on this poll, and I would include myself in this, have moved at least 3 times in a lifetime. Some people 9 or more times. And whilst it might not be a process that we enjoy, it is something that we are perfectly prepared to do and have experience of. Would that be a fair summary for what I'm hearing?
Mhm.
Can we then move on to the next question and suss out, have we been moving long distances? This is the one that reads, how many times have you moved to a different city, county or country? Do we scroll down to get to that one, Harriet?
So
That's what I've
Already
got on
had
my
the-
screen. It's already
individuals need to scroll down on their own poll so that they can answer all of the questions. So I can see that about
It's not appearing on my screen at all.
it might be that the presentation screen, it's gone behind your presentation screen.
I'm going to cautiously draw results from what is in front of me, which is
I'll just share those results with
okay,
you, Kathleen,
thank you.
and with everyone.
Okay, so the question I asked was, how many times have you moved to a different city, county or country? And what that's showing is that while quite a lot of us have moved 3 to 5 times in our lifetime and possibly more, just over 40% of us have either never moved to a different place or only up to 2 times, which itself is quite a lot. But there are still 39, 49, 51, 60% of people who've moved more than 3 times to start life again in a different city, county or country. And again, the possible hypothesis is that, okay, you've made pretty radical moves during your life, not just in terms of the property you live in, but the wider environment around you. And I'm therefore not surprised that people are asking questions and thinking about, where am I going to go next? If I close this, will we left still seeing the PowerPoint? Yes, we are. Okay, so in terms of making that decision about moving, I can advise you about where to go for information. I would never feel confident telling you what would be right for you, because these decisions are very personal. Some of the factors which will influence you are how attached are you to belongings? Does decluttering fill you with delight or horror? Are you in good health? How much time have you got to carry out this complicated process, or would you rather do other things with your life? And what are the pull factors of, oh, I really want to be in my dream environment and this is not it? And there is no way that I can advise you on what's the right decision for you to make. And I suspect also no way that your family and friends, they can listen to you and they can faithfully say, yes, back, I've heard what you said. But in the end, this is a very personal decision to you. And all I'm going to do today is try and give you a bit more information to help you decide what to do. Okay, retirement housing is only one of several options which could make your life more age-friendly. You can age-proof your own home, arrange it so that you have got cooking, toilet, sleeping and leisure facilities all on the same floor, and you're not trying to spend your life caring for a garden that you love dearly but is now beyond you. That's about staying in your own home but adapting it around you. If you like your location, but not your individual home, you could move to something that better met your needs, which might be a bungalow, it might be a flat. Surprisingly often, it might be a park home, though many of the points that I'm going to make about the problems of leasehold and retirement housing apply equally to park homes. You might, if you're feeling really adventurous and you like projects, self-build an age-friendly home, preferably in conjunction with some other people who are doing something similar, and have something that really reflects your own personality. Some people get huge satisfaction from doing that. You could, as Janet has raised in the subject of the next speaker, you could explore co-housing, which is living with a group of other people of similar age and interest to yourself who share your housing preferences. Or you could explore intergenerational living, which is about adapting your accommodation so you can live on more or less friendly stroke intimate terms with someone from a younger generation, possibly a family, possibly a single. I live in a student city. It would be incredibly easy for me to live on the ground floor of my house and invite 1, 2, 3 students to live in the bedrooms upstairs, depending on my tolerance and enthusiasm for midnight parties. Or I could relocate to a more age-friendly area. People who live in villages who find that they can no longer drive often find that they're having to think about, where can I live, where I can actually walk or go by public transport to the activities I want to go to. There are a whole range of options, of which retirement housing is only one, although it may be the one that is the best marketed. And because all of these are either quite difficult to organise, or if you like, quite low key, you may find it more difficult to meet people who have practiced some of these. And I would urge you, if you're thinking of doing self-build, if you're thinking of doing co-housing, make the effort to find someone who did it before you, and don't just read what you see in the Sunday supplements. Go and talk to someone who tells you about the downsides as well as the upsides of all the housing options, including retirement housing. So what is retirement housing and what does the jargon mean? Very crudely, it falls into 2 different types, one of which you'll see referred to as sheltered or supported housing, which is the majority of the stock in this country. If you go and look at your standard McCarthy Stone scheme and your standard local authority scheme in your area, you'll see that it will offer 1 or more communal lounges. It will have very nice, well-maintained gardens. There will be, in the private sector, although less often in the public sector or the affordable sector, an on-site scheme manager who can be an absolute lifesaver if you have problems with health or care or emergencies, because they're there. What they say will carry weight with authorities, which you or I ringing up and saying my mum's not very well wouldn't have. And they will organise excursions and activities. It's great if you need from that scheme a fairly low level of support. Extra care or assisted living does all the above, plus you pay for a certain amount of daily support with household tasks, access to on-site carers. You can bring in domiciliary care to a shelter scheme, but in an extra care scheme, there will be on-site carers who you'll get to know before you need them. There will be cooked meals in the residence lounge. There will be, because it's bigger and there are more people, a wider range of social activities. And depending on the size and cost of the scheme or scale of the scheme, it may include healthcare and sports facilities. And it should go without saying, but it gets lost in the blurb, that the more support you're getting, the more it's going to cost. And I'll come on to that later on. I think, can we do the second set of polls, which look at how much care people need at the moment and how much care you've been giving to other people, which have given you an understanding of what the care world means. Harriet, could you put up the polls, please? Is it not? That's it.
Can you see that, Kathleen?
Yep, I'm looking now at one that says Future Lives 1. How close to your home does your nearest family member live?
Excellent. Take 2. So there's 2 questions here. So people might need to scroll down to see the second one below.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a pretty even spread of answers. So I've got 26, 36, 43% of you who have someone within an hour's travel, and 48% who have somebody where their nearest support is more than an hour away. This matters. My mum, before she died, was able to live on her own for 10 years of frailty because I was 30 minutes away. It wasn't 30 minutes when she needed a light bulb changing in the rush hour, and it did nothing at all for my nerves. But looking back, I'm very proud of what I achieved for her. If I'd been 2 hours away, those of you who are caring for people who are 2 hours away know that you go once a fortnight or once a month, and even that is driving you nuts. Let's see if we can scroll down to the second poll. For some reason, it's not online. Yes, it is. The second one asks, have you ever provided unpaid care to someone else? And it says here that 48% of you haven't. I would strongly recommend, before you make any decisions about your own needs in old age, that you look around to find someone in your area who needs somebody to do their shopping or take them for a lift to some kind of social activity or change their library book. And you start doing it and you get to know them and you get to understand the pressures that they're under, and you see the pressures that it would put on whoever's going to do it for you, because that's a really important factor to take into account when you're considering, what am I going to do to safeguard my own needs in old age? Because your own need for care, your access to care and support in your area will influence your moving plans. And coming back to my point about living in a village, if you're dependent on a car and you live in an area which has got no decent access to a teaching hospital, it's not going to be much fun growing old and needing care. This is where the problems with the NHS and the failures of public transport are really biting on people living in villages. So you need to think about all of these factors. People who live in retirement housing. This is a survey that was done, I think, by ARCO, one of the who run retirement communities. It's compared with those who've not yet moved, but considering making a move. Immediate improvement in people's morale when they move into a retirement housing community. They stay healthier for longer, they're more active, they're less lonely, they have a greater sense of a safety net, they feel secure, they enjoy life more. And ironically, they have more privacy, not less, because presumably they have fewer sort of people knocking on the door and saying, are you okay? We haven't seen you for a bit. So for those people who move in, I'm not talking about what happens to their descendants or their inheritors when they've passed on, but for those people who move in, retirement communities, retirement housing do indeed bring benefits, but not everyone is going to thrive in a retirement community. Who lives in retirement housing? Your average age of moving in is 80 to 83. I think most people on this call are far too young to be considering this as an option, but you might get around to it. Typical length of stay is 8 years. I did look to see if I could argue that people who live in retirement housing live longer than the rest of the population. They don't appear to. They live for exactly the same length of time, but they appear to have less need of brought-in care. They used to be predominantly single. Now there are more couples as more men are living longer. Is it a last home? It probably is, but not if you get advanced dementia. And it may be that if you've got something like Parkinson's and you live to a stage where you need really intensive care, or you get cancer, you may end up in a hospice. But for an awful lot of people, you do spend most of the last years of your life in that retirement housing, and you will convalesce much better if you come out of hospital to retirement housing following a hip replacement or something like that, than if you go home to your house where you still got to work out how to get upstairs and get to the loo. We asked people, why do they move to retirement housing? And generally, it wasn't a feeling they were tremendously worried about care. It was a feeling that they could no longer cope with the mechanics of daily life. They weren't coping with maintaining the house or the garden or the car. They were lonely or they felt unsafe following bereavement. They wanted freedom to travel. People whose eyesight is starting to pack up, whose sense of balance is going. Fear of falls comes into it. Again, you don't have to move to retirement housing. You could move to somewhere with level access, a flat or a bungalow. They're future-proofing. They're looking to the future and thinking, I want to be sure that I can look after myself. I'm not going to be a burden on anyone. They may be moving to be near family, or the neighbourhood has changed beyond recognition and they just no longer feel comfortable in their former home. So think about your current home. Try to start from a position of, I know what my costs are. How much does it cost to run? Can you keep it in good repair? Who will look out for you if you need help in an emergency? I go and have supper once a week with this guy who's had a stroke who lives across the road, and the guy next door to me goes and picks him up if he falls over, he being stronger than me. It is not the case that you can't get help from neighbours. It is the case that you need to think about who will look after you. Is it livable if you're sick or convalescent and can't climb stairs? Can it be future-proofed? And there is something here from the Elderly Accommodation Council called the Hoop tool, which will help you ask those questions in a methodical way. Okay, this is now going to focus specifically on retirement housing, having hopefully said to you, here are a lot of things you need to think about before you take that step. Let's assume that you've got as far as saying, okay, I'm potentially interested in leasehold, that is a form of home ownership, retirement housing. What am I going to do? What questions am I going to ask? Well, first you need to be aware that you're not a freeholder and you're not on your own. You are living in housing where you share facilities with other people, you share costs with other people, and there is a management company. And that means that there will be ongoing costs and you're not your own boss in the way that you were in your freehold house. If you're already living in a flat, you'll be well aware of the issues about leasehold, but I will draw out for you the special quirks that apply to retirement housing. First, there'll be a ground rent, not on any new properties, because the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act stopped that, but existing properties come with a ground rent, and I'll show you some ground rents in a couple of slides on. There'll be a service charge. I can quote you an example of a service charge that's £5,000 a year. In one organisation that pays for access to an immaculate garden and a swimming pool, and in another one it pays for a room for a physiotherapist and a hairdresser who comes in once a week, plus all the costs of running all that communal space. So providers need to tell you what you are paying for, and also they are required to tell you how much it costs to run, which may be quite different from what you're paying. Does it include a sinking fund? A sinking fund, otherwise known as the contingency fund. You decorate your own property, don't you? You have money in the bank that says, okay, I know I'm going to have to look after the roof at some point. If you were a business, you'd call that your sinking stroke contingency fund. And a retirement housing scheme has to have one of those. If it doesn't have one of those, at the point when there's a problem with the roof, there won't be the money to fix it and you've got big problems. So having a sinking stroke contingency fund is a good thing, but who controls that fund? If the retirement housing provider goes bankrupt, does the money in your sinking fund vanish? Or is it held by a scheme-related trust so that it's protected for you? And is it enough money? And you can get into very interesting debates if you've got a group of people with different incomes and ages and expectations to still be here in 5 years' time about who's going to pay to put the money in to fix the roof. So these are charges that arise from the fact that you're living as part of a group. But they're also charges where there's a possibility that your provider could be charging you more and creaming it off. You want to know, is there a sinking fund? How is it decided upon? Can it be reviewed? And how much is it? Sometimes there will be what's called either an event fee or a management fee. This is particularly the case in extra care, where the annual charge for paying for all those services can be higher than a lot of people can meet from a fixed income. And the arrangement then is that we are rolling up your service charge, but you'll have to pay it back when you move on. That rolled up fee is rarely related to, we would have charged you £2,000 a year and you've been here for 8 years, we're going to charge you 16,000. It's much more likely to be related to a percentage of the value of the property. Again, you need to see how that is justified, and these are questions that you need to ask up front. when you go into a retirement housing scheme and sit down with that smiling person behind the desk, or you go and talk to an estate agent because something's caught your eye on the high street, the information that they give you should tell you the length of the lease, 10 years, 20 years, 99 years, 900 years. It should tell you the ground rent. It should tell you the service charge and how it's calculated, and it should tell you the event fee. And I'll show you one in the next slide, but if you're not getting this information up front, for me, that would ring alarm bells. And also, there must be a cooling off period. I might fall madly in love with this property, but I need to be able to go away and come back in a fortnight's time. And yes, they could have sold it to someone else in the meantime, but I'm not tied to buying it from them. I'm one of those boring people who, if she goes and buys a new dress, likes to try it on in the shop, or go for a walk around the block and try it on again, or decide not to bother. So cooling off periods are important to me, but they are there for your safety. This is information which I downloaded from the internet. It's from a company called Retirement Home Search, who provide support to Firstport to manage an awful lot of existing leasehold retirement housing. And you'll see inside the red circle, they have given you all the key information nicely summarised. So you know the annual ground rent, you know that the next uplift will be in 8 years' time. You know the annual service charge, 3,500, which is not a lot, might be slightly more than you think you're paying at the moment in living in your existing property. You know it's in council tax band A, which is probably a saving from where you are at the moment. And this one has no transfer, no contingency, no event fees, and you can instantly see that. You need to look for that information in every piece of literature you read from a retirement housing company. And if you can't find it, obviously you're going to ask them, but for me, that would ring alarm bells. So what are these costs? Are they reasonable? I'm going to start with sheltered and supported housing. An annual service charge will typically be £3,000 to £5,000. That covers the upkeep of the communal areas. About a third of the floor area of a retirement housing scheme will typically be lounges, corridors, stairs, car parking areas, grounds, etc. They've all got to be paid for and upkept, and you will be responsible for that through your service charge, and you'll go on being responsible until the property is sold. And we'll come on to what happens if you can't sell the property. As discussed, there needs to be a sinking fund. Actually, I'll skip across and say the service charge for extra carers, you can see, is a lot higher. That's because you're paying for those carers who come in typically 2 or 3 times a week for an hour and do some light household duties. They're there if you need light bulbs changing. They might cut your toenails, maybe, probably not cut your toenails, but they might wash your feet if you can't reach. So you're paying for carers and the fact that you've got more communal areas because all those gyms and swimming pools and physiotherapy lounges have to be paid for. You'll have a sinking fund in both cases. It will be higher in the extra care scheme because you've got a higher proportion of communal areas. Ground rents, there may or may not be a ground rent. There won't be on any new developments. There may be on existing developments. And it's unlikely that a shelter scheme will have a large event fee, but they're starting to creep in. And event fees in extra care can be quite substantial. 1% per annum cumulative after 10 years doesn't look like much, but when your inheritors come to sell, they will have to pay 10.5% of the property value to the retirement housing provider. 5% per annum cumulatively after 10 years is 55% of property value. And I have seen percentages that are higher than that. So you need to look at what your costs are, and you need to weigh up both what's available in your area and also whether you want to pay more for extra care than you do for sheltered housing, and how location compares. Where I live here in Nottingham, there's a really nice extra care scheme overlooking the River Trent, and there's a sheltered scheme which is next door to the library. How am I going to make this impossible decision? It won't be based on the quality of care. It will be based on what I think I'm going to be doing in my spare time when I'm old and frail. This is a set of costs that I derived by going on the Elderly Accommodation Council website and asking what schemes are currently available with vacancies in Cheltenham. Cheltenham is a location that's got a lot of retirement housing, so it gives a decent range of comparators. If I'd gone on Rightmove, I would have got a lot more schemes, but a lot less information about what's in each one. So you need to look at both options. Well, first notice that enormous range of property prices. £63,000 is almost certainly one of the cheapest properties in Cheltenham. 260 to 430,000. It won't be the most expensive, but it will be a lot more than most people were thinking of paying for a two-bed flat. So there is a huge range of different properties here, which you can argue suit every price band. But look at those annual costs. The 89,950, which is a new build, has an annual cost, ground rent, service charge, etc., of 8,955, i.e. it's 10% of 8,950, and it has no event fee. So, okay, I can easily afford the 89,950, but £9,000 in service charge, I'd have to have a pretty good pension to be able to afford that. So that might be difficult for me. So I might then be tempted to go to the one that's 135,000, where the annual cost is £256, but the event fee after 8 years is 8,300. But I'm going to be dead then, so it really doesn't matter. And I'll come back to my locational criterion. The one at 155,000, the annual cost is quite low and the event fee is nil, but there are only 60 years left on the lease. So that might be a problem to sell if, when I die, there are only 50 years left on the lease. I'm not going to make any of these decisions based on these financial factors. I'm going to make them based on what is the best property for me, but hopefully I will rule out the ones that I definitely can't afford or I think are punitive. And when I get to the bottom one, the one that's priced at 260 to 430,000, I couldn't find any information on the website about the event fee or the annual cost. I had to go away and root around for a slightly older brochure from the same provider for a scheme based in Nantwich, where I discovered that the annual service charge for a property that was cheaper than this one was £28,000. I think that's targeted. I can see people shaking their heads. I think this is targeted at very rich people with index-linked pensions. It's not for you or me, but it took me a long time to find that out, and I knew what I was looking for. I don't know why costs vary so widely. I think there are a range of providers in the market who come with very different motivations and markets. And some of them come in and dip out again. Our friends at McCarthy, Stone and Churchill have been around for a long time and have a market. The provider of this scheme at the bottom one on here hasn't been around all that long, and I suspect they won't stay around all that long because I think their financial model is not sustainable. You could have lots of detective work fun doing this. You don't actually have to move at all. You could just sort of play around wondering about other people's motives. Okay, so you've done magnificent research and you moved in and you're very happy, but you didn't have any obviously known inheritors, and some poor nephew or niece living in another county inherits when you drop dead of a stroke, and they discover, oh my God, there are these ongoing service charges that will be, you saw, £4,000 a year. I've got to pay them now, and I've got to pay them until the property is sold. Can these, like Octopus do with energy charges, be rolled up and deducted from the sale proceeds when the sale proceeds come in? Some providers say yes. Others say we want the money now. How reasonable is that? Well, if I'd gone out and bought a lease car, the provider would want their pound of flesh, the hire purchase agreement money, regardless of whether I was using it or not, and a house is in the same situation. There are different ways you can look at ongoing service charges. Resale values. I checked the McCarthy Stone website and it assured me in large letters that their properties that were built in the last 7 years, i.e. since the last housing crash, have all held their value and can be sold. They didn't say whether they'd gone up as fast as the 3-bed semi that the person sold in order to move in, and they didn't say the length of time to resell, but they did encourage you to sell through them. Scheme managers are human. If I'm if I've moved into a scheme that's been built for the last 4 years, and the scheme manager is still trying to sell properties that haven't been decorated, haven't been lived in, as well as my property, then inevitably those empty properties are going to look more attractive. So for me, I would be a bit dubious about being the first purchaser of a retirement property, unless it was exactly where I wanted to live. And I would be saying to whoever's going to inherit when I die, just be aware I'm having a great time. I'm moving because I want to have a great time. I'm not going to call you to drive for an hour and a half to change me light bulbs, but there will be a financial penalty to pay for this. And if they say, yes, of course, come and live near me, and yes, I will pay someone to change your light bulbs, then you might want to rethink your options. But you're making a decision for you, but one that has knock-on effects on your inheritors. And I'm not in a position to tell you how well you get on with your inheritors, or even how rational they are when they're grieving for your departure. I hope that your scheme manager will be reasonable, that they will do their absolute best to sell the property. I would still recommend that you use a scheme manager rather than an estate agent, because I've been looking pretty hard to find estate agents who really understand this product, and I'm struggling. But there will be competing pressures on your scheme manager. So just be aware that this is not a way of getting rich quick. If you really think that you're living, I mean, I live in a property in an area where prices are racing up. It would make sense for me to stay in my property, or to keep my property as an asset of all those students, and rent a retirement housing unit if I felt that I wanted to move into one, because that protects my capital and means that if I drop dead, nobody has to pay the service charge. But there are very few rented properties about, and again, I might not get one in that site next to the library where I really want to live. So how do I find out what is available in my area? You go to the EAC accommodation directory, advanced search, type that into your search engine, it will come up, and you look at the various types of retirement housing schemes in your area, and you look for vacancies. You also go to Rightmove or Zoopla, and you filter must have a retirement property, and that will give you a choice of more properties but with less information. And you consider, what do I mean by my area? Do I want to move 10 miles down the road because there's more retirement housing there? Might even have a better library for me. Who knows what the trade-offs are? And historically, second-hand properties took the prime sites on the edge of town. Some of them were built within sort of 5 minutes walk of Debenham, sort of a lot of use that is now. So second-hand sites may be better located. They may be next door to Waitrose. Modern ones tend to be next door to Aldi. But the very best sites have gone. But existing residents, and they're all likely to be older if they all moved in at the same time. And much depends on the quality, the experience of the scheme manager. And since scheme managers don't get paid particularly well, they may go off and work behind a till in Sainsbury's and you lose them. I would strongly urge you, if you're thinking of moving to a retirement housing scheme, certainly go to the open day, which any new build provider will offer. Otherwise, go through Age UK, go through your local library, try and find somebody who lives in there, whose judgment you trust, and say, what's it like? Don't just turn up and say, I want to listen to the sales talk and move in. Often, if there is a guest suite, you can ask, can I come and stay in this scheme for 2 or 3 days over a weekend, get a feel for it? That's an option that's worth pursuing. Make sure you go to more than one. Shop around, and don't forget about those co-housing intergenerational options that were flagged at the beginning of this talk. It's such a complex decision where you're going to live. It requires all of your attention, and it requires the acquisition skills that we've all developed over all our lives about how do I choose what's right for me. So thank you for listening.